Recording in progress, which means hello, I'm Claire Wasserman, founder and author of Ladies Get Paid. We are an educational platform, global community, and of course, a book all about helping women earn more and live better. And as part of that mission, every month, I host a job seeker support group. It's a little bit more on the emotional support side than like the technical job search side. But today we actually are going to get kind of into the technical of looking for work, and no better guide for that than David Fano here today. He is the founder of Teal, which is a personal growth platform that gives you the tools, skills, and recommendations you need to accelerate your career, starting with the job search. For those of you who are entrepreneurs out there, by the way, the blood, sweat, and tears that go into coming up with an elevator pitch, condensing everything that's wonderful about what you do into one sentence is hard. Which I also realize doesn't matter if you're an entrepreneur. As anyone who has to write an about part of the LinkedIn, which we will get into, or introduce yourself, especially during an interview, how do you take all that is great and condense it? So I always enjoy when reading somebody's elevator blurb. But today, by the way, our key takeaways are going to focus on customizing your resume, improving your LinkedIn profile, and managing this job search process. And it's very much rooted in all of the fantastic questions that you submitted, everybody here. So super appreciate you all writing in your questions and the vulnerability with which many of you shared your story. Before we get into answering those questions based on those three buckets, I just want to, for David here, who's like a serial entrepreneur, former WeWork executive, and ex-architect, which, talk about career pivots right there. You really could do anything. So especially after WeWork, because that's how we connected when you were there, winding up your time there. So why create Teal? Like, job search has not necessarily been the through line, I think, of your career, but it's clearly something you deeply feel passionately about. So I'm curious, why go all in on this when you really could have done so many other things? And then if you want to give us more detail about how phenomenal Teal is, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. So I've always liked to work. I like work, and work has been a source of energy for me in my life. And obviously that came from a place of privilege. Not a lot of people get to say that. But I remember when I wanted to be a comic book artist when I was a kid. And my dad said, that's not a real job. My dad's an immigrant from Cuba. He came in 1960. And so for him, work was not this like source of joy. Although I think he liked being a builder. He sort of like stumbled into it. But just this idea that like work's not for that. Work is like for making money. And while I was at WeWork, I really resonated with the mission of like make a life, not just a living or whatever, like their versions of that. But what was an issue for me was it was always geared like towards the entrepreneur, and this idea that like the only way you could find fulfilling work was to start a company. And I don't mean to be a hypocrite. I like starting companies. But it's not for everyone. I saw a lot of friends that were architects like start companies and they're like, wait, I don't get to do architecture anymore. And so I think there's like a little bit of a myth that like starting a business gets you closer to your craft or gets you, and I was like, that's just not true. And so like, if I'm really compelled by the idea if like more people could like their work, like what would that mean? Like if we could all have a better, more empowered like relationship with our work, then like I feel like so many other things would sort of go away. But not a lot of people get to do that. Like they don't know who they know, they don't know what they don't know. They weren't like born with access or like proximity to people that show them how to do these things. And then so much of your career is just like, I don't know, like being in the right place at the right time, making just like that one small move. And so I just thought if technology could help people know what they don't know and sort of be that like relative with a C title for everybody, then we could help more people like their work.
This is a big question that would require a long answer, but I'm not giving you enough time for it. So just very quickly, in building Teal, at this point, well over, I think, 85,000 people who are part of your community, anything surprise you in either the themes of struggles they're having or, I mean, your own struggles that you've had as you've built it. But I am curious. I mean, you've amassed a lot of both quantitative and qualitative data on job seekers. Like, what do they need? What do they want? And did any of these sort of answers surprise you?
Yes, I would say generally the way I've not operated, I think mainly out of my personality and then sort of also privilege, but is the level of permanence people treat career decisions with, that they're these like one-way doors. They're just not. Like they're really not. And so the amount of weight that's put on from like the smallest to the biggest career decision, from like what size font should I put on my resume? Like, it's fine, any size font. Like, if this one doesn't work, pick the next one. To like, should I pivot careers? It's like, look, if you don't like it, you can switch again in a year. Like, it just this sense that these are these irreversible decisions, and the level of like gravity that is given to every decision as it relates to the career. That's not to trivialize. Some of them are more important than others, right? Like, look, if you don't, I mean, if you don't negotiate when you first get the job, like, it's a little harder to get the money later. Like, that's true, but you could also leave, you know? And so I'd say that's been like the biggest, 'cause I'm a person who, like, when I wasn't enjoying myself at a job, I quit. Again, I think that comes from a place of privilege to be able to do something like that. One, and that I'm a white dude in America. And then also just like my family was well off enough to support those things. I went to an Ivy League graduate program, things like that. So I get all that. But still, I think I think there's just more optionality and more choice in the career than a lot of people let themselves believe.
And I also think it's this mindset of the binary, right? That we're often stuck in, like there's a right decision or a wrong decision.
Right.
And in fact, it's actually, you just make the decision and then you learn how to pivot. And I sort of look at everything as practice for the next, which is why I'm such a huge believer in just going for the opportunity, because you are going to get better at applying for the next opportunity. You will be a better interviewer. You don't know who you're going to meet. But with all of that, it requires energy and organization. So I'm going to dive right into managing your job search. I'm actually going to start there before we get into the nitty gritty of the customizing the resume and of the LinkedIn. So just to prevent burnout. So let's start with a person who is either about to leave their job or maybe they just were let go. There is so much to get done when it comes to looking for work. What's your advice for kind of those early days for anyone who's in the overwhelm? How do you begin to organize this stuff?
Yeah, so I think a counterintuitive thing to do on a job search is to go slow to go fast. I think a lot of people try to just like, what can I do to start making progress? Right. I'm just gonna start applying to jobs. I'm just gonna like start editing my resume. And I think that those things actually like compound the burnout, because you never gave yourself a minute to like sort of set up a strategy and think through the stuff that ends up just like grinding the gears, right? Like, what do I really want to make? Like, have that range. But people just like apply to everything. And then when they apply, like, oh, that's too low. It's like, well, you didn't even knew what your number was. So like, use that, right? Like, figure out a way to reduce the decision fatigue. Like, figure out your early things that really matter so you don't have to think about those. Come up with a realistic timeline. Because I also see that people say, oh, I need a job. I'm going to be super choosy. And then now they're 6 months in and like, oh, shoot, if I would have accepted that job at month 2, that wasn't so bad. I wouldn't be in the situation I'm in right now. And so, not that you can't change your mind. That would sort of go against what I said earlier. But doing that early work to gain clarity, again, another example I see is people aren't like super clear on what they want. They're like, well, I could be like an ops person, or I could do like marketing coordinator, or I've thought about like maybe starting product management, so I'm just gonna have my LinkedIn be like all 3. And like, so then you just kind of look like a generalist, and most people don't want to hire that. And so I think this like clarity on positioning, clarity on what you want, and it's just like kind of go slow to go fast. Now it needs to stop. I've seen also people get stuck in that phase, and that's not helpful. But I think giving yourself like time boxing it, so I'm gonna take like 2 weeks to get crisp on what I want, and then launching into it, I've seen people just have much better results with that initial planning.
You mentioned realistic timeline. What do you have not that any of this is a one size fits all, but what did you have in mind for that? How can you learn to be realistic with yourself when it comes to your time management?
Well, one is like what time you have available. Right. So I think, I tell people a job search is going to take 100 applications. That's just a kind of like a nice round number to work through. Right. So if I'm cool to switch jobs in a year, that's like 10 applications a month. If I want to land a job in 30 days, well, you got to get like 100 applications out in 30 days. Now that assumes an equal level of quality, because job search is absolutely one of those things where quality and quantity really come into play. You can't just spray a bunch of job applications out there that are not good, especially in a competitive market like we are now. So I kind of tell it's like 10%, 10%. You're going to like 10%, you're going to get interviews, and like 10% of those, you might land a job. Again, not always, but kind of like roughly that's what the data tells us. If you're a recruiter right now, those ratios are probably way worse because there's a lot of recruiters in the market and companies aren't growing. If you're an AI engineer, those numbers are probably way, way better, right? So obviously occupation, job, lots of nuance on that. We're going to be releasing some data on that soon from like what we've seen from our platform. But think about what you have available. Like, what's your timeline? When do you need to have the job by? What else is going on in your life? And so I think that's pretty key. And then from there, you can kind of back out how long you think it should take.
What about efficiencies? A lot of the answers to the questions I'm going to be asking, Teal gives the tool for it, but I'm going to ask you anyway. So how do we set up some stuff in the beginning to make this process go faster as we do it? So one example would be like a template of a resume, right? And that you then can tweak as you apply to different jobs. What might be some other suggestions?
So I would say focus on the things you can control. Like set goals. But think about goals as input goals rather than output goals. People say, oh, I need to get an offer by January 1st. It's like, you don't control that.
Right.
There's way too many externalities. What you do control is applications. That's why I like applications as like a metric. I have 100% control in applications. I mean, other than jobs not existing, if you have too narrow of like what you're looking for, I've yet to really see that problem. I've seen people say, hey, I haven't found jobs, but they're only using like LinkedIn in one query, right? There are plenty of jobs. You might have to put in the work to find them, but there are jobs. For the most part, there's really no absolutes in job searching either. But what are those things that you fully control? There are zero externalities to that you can set goals to and give yourself a cadence. Because I also think like cadence and pacing is really important in the job search, because it's also very much a dynamic market, right? New jobs come online every day. New jobs get closed every day. So it's also not a kind of a thing that like, oh, I searched today and I'm just going to work on those jobs for the next 6 months. That's not how the market works. And it is susceptible to seasonality and calendars and budgets, corporate budgets. So I think, thinking about what you can control and then how you want to goal on those things is another thing I would recommend everybody do.
Yeah. And I'm going to take that one step further. For those of you who are pro members, encourage y'all to sign up because we do monthly group coaching. I'm obsessed with just micro stepping it down to its tiniest component so that you are truly honed in on the process and the progress you're making within that process. To David's point of, it's not about, the outcome and the goal as much as that's what we're orienting towards. You really need to look at, yes, I'm applying to these jobs, but what are all of the steps that it takes to apply to that job, and being reasonable and realistic with yourself per each of those steps. Motivation. I mean, the emotional side of this, right? I mean, it does I was going to say, does Teal offer like therapy? But I guess that's more ladies get paid. So how do you stay motivated within this when it feels like it is just never ending, let alone the rejection that's probably happening all along, all throughout?
I wish I had like a simple answer to that.
Yeah.
Find the parts of the process. Look, no one puts expert job seeker on their resume as a skill. right? I think that it's kind of like a weird thing that people don't want to be good at. But there are a lot of things in the process that are skills that you can put on your resume and that are worth being good at, right? Positioning, marketing, copywriting. That's what your resume is. I just think when we think about it as a resume and it's like ourselves, it feels like it's bragging, it's weird. But being able to write concisely and convey value, that's valuable no matter what your job is, whether you're a product manager, a marketer, an operations person, that's valuable. And so I think looking at the process as a series of challenges that you can take on to learn things, right? Oh, I'm going to get good at experimenting and submit 2 different versions of a resume. And I'm going to look at the analytics and see which one gets a better response. I think just like looking at the process as opportunities to learn and build a skill set, even then like rejections might be like, oh, okay, well, that was an experiment, a failed experiment, and less a rejection. Right. And so I think, how can you use this as a process to explore new skills, build things that will, again, I think people feel like, oh, job searching is like a useless skill. I hope to never have to do it again. That's also not true. These skills are valuable internally. Once you want to get a promotion, you got to interview internally. So you got to get good at interviewing. You got to, figure out how to position yourself for the promotion, how to, show that you're qualified for it. So these are all skills that are actually worth getting really good at. And I don't think people generally think about the job search that way.
Yeah, I 1,000% agree. Same thing with salary negotiation. We all, folks look at it as like a once a year horrible thing you have to do. But I'm like, first of all, don't wait until you have to negotiate all throughout the year. You want to be building your case. Same thing with job searching. Don't wait till you need the job to go look for the job. So we need to, if we can build in these skills into our everyday, that's going to make it less scary, I think, and also just improve us as employees and sort of human beings. Quick question though about being strategic in your applications. So somebody submitted the question, should we focus on getting a role we have more experience in, even if that role isn't our dream role? This is such a personal question. So I don't know. Yeah. How would you,
so I have thoughts for that. I have a lot of thoughts on that topic.
Yeah.
So look, here's a truth in corporate America. Companies want to hire you for what you did, not what you want to do. Mm-hmm. Right. So understand that as fact. Like the least risky thing for me to do as an employer is hire someone who's literally done the same job before. Like I made a LinkedIn post the other day, right? If I get hurt and like I break my arm, I don't want to go to the foot doctor who's opening up the arm practice.
Right.
Right. Like I want to go to the person or, the dentist who's now treating feet. Like I don't want to do that. And so, and I think we sort of get upset. I see job seekers, they won't take a chance on me. It's like, why would they? Mm-hmm. Right? Like, there is very little in it for the company. That's not personal. That's just good business. Yeah. Why should I take a bet on someone who's never done this before? That's more specific for pivoters. But then even when you go to like promotion, it also happens, right? It's like, well, why would I hire someone who's never been a director of social media when I could hire someone who's had that job before, who's managed before, who's built the strategy? Why should I hire someone who wants to do this for the first time on my dime? Mm-hmm. So that's not to say it's not possible, but I think it's important to understand the game you're playing. And so it is on you to read the job description and communicate in a way that de-risks it for the company. And I think a lot of people show like, oh, I've never done it. I'm just going to show what I did. You need to, if there was that one project that you did manage, that one project where you got to be strategic, highlight those, right? Like find those ways. I told the company's not going to give you the benefit of the doubt, and they're not going to build the bridges for you. You need to fill those gaps. So you need to read the JD, say what they want, and completely de-risk it. Just because you haven't had the title before doesn't mean you can't get it, but it does mean you need to write your resume in a way that enables them to envision you in that position. One, because it best suits you, but then two, you're competing against people that have had that job before. The other thing people forget in the job market is like they think about it as like, oh, it's just me in this application. Why didn't they pick me? You might be amazing. It's just you're operating in a market and someone else applied who might be doing the inverse. Like they really need the job and they're actually going down a level. Then you get into like the overqualified stuff.
Yeah.
But you're in a competitive market. So it's not even about you. So you need to put your best foot forward that enables the company to envisioning you in that position. And then if you can fill it in with anything that sort of makes you a better candidate, you need to do that too.
Mm-hmm. Actually, quick question on that overqualified, because somebody did submit a question that they keep getting to final rounds, but are told either that they're overqualified or that they're pulling the role or rethinking. Comments on that one?
Yeah, I think it's a sales process and you need to like front run the objections. You just got to be really honest with yourself and front run the objections. Like, what are they going to say? Well, I promise I'm not going to come in and ask for a raise in 6 months. Or, right, like, let me flip it. Let me tell you the concerns. I hire someone senior. This is a stopgap thing. As soon as the market gets better, they're going to leave and get the real title that they deserve. And so I'm going to find myself in a lurch as a company. And in 6 months, I'm going to be searching again. And that's going to be a real headache. You need to front run that objection. They're not going to be willing to roll up their sleeves, depending on the level of seniority. This would change, but it's like they're used to managing and now we need them to do the work and they're not going to want to do it, or they'll start strong and then they're going to phase out, not going to want to do it because it's going to be a regression for them in their career. Like the truth is most people have seen these things actually happen. Like a lot of people have taken the leap because it's really appealing to hire someone who's got so much more experience to fill a sort of smaller role, because everything on the surface feels so amazing. But if you've been working on long enough, you've been bitten by that before. You hired that person who was senior, you took that bet because it felt so good on the surface, and you're like, shoot, there they were in my office 6 months from now saying this work was beneath them. That's exactly what I was worried about. And here it is, it happened. Right. So that's not to say you're going to do that, but you're fighting against like this scar tissue that people have. So you need to convincingly front run those objections.
And does that mean you proactively address it, or you just prompt them with what might be any of your objections and hope that they're actually going to be honest with you?
You have to like feel that one out.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. I would say like, you're going to get a sense from the kinds of questions they're asking if that's a real concern of theirs.
Got some questions in the chat here off the pivot. So, it's how does one pivot without experience then? And then that's the $1 billion question. And then some people are answering that right there. I have some thoughts on how to demonstrate transferable skills. But I'm curious if you have a response off the bat. I mean, you're a pivoter.
Yeah, so I think I am, but my pivot's not like one you can model after. I mean, you can. There's like some learnings, but so look, you can do what I did, start a company and build the experience yourself, and so completely take control of it. So that's like one extreme. You could do that. That's not to say like I'm special and I got to do that. I'm just saying it's a really painful process. I'm not sure I'd recommend it, but so if we were to bucket pivots, right? So I'd say like the easiest job to land is like literally the same job at the same type of company. I was a salesperson at Moderna and now I'm a salesperson at Pfizer, right? That's like the easiest, like lateral, exact same position, easiest kind of job search. Then promotion probably becomes the next, trying to get a job I haven't had before, but at least like the position's the same. That's like a head coach in the college going to be like an offensive coordinator in NFL or something. Then there's, shifting industry. That gets a little tougher. I was a salesperson in medical. Now I'm going to go be a SaaS salesperson. That's like a slight pivot, but still a pivot because people value the domain. Another version of that is I did, sales in medical. And now I'm going to go do marketing in medical. It really depends on the company and the hiring manager. Some people value domain over function. I've really seen it go both ways. It's a very personal decision. Some people think you can learn one. Some people think you can learn the other. When I worked at WeWork, we wanted to hire salespeople, and we didn't care that at least the person who led sales didn't care that they understood real estate. Because that would have led to like hiring a bunch of real estate brokers, and they actually preferred like enterprise salespeople because they had like good sales muscles and sales motion and sales training. And it's like we could teach them real estate. Other people are like, look, I want real estate people. I can teach them how to sell. So it really, there's no right answer there, but those are like two flavors. And then there's like the new industry, new profession. That's the hardest kind of pivot. And then tactics are go to school, do volunteering work, but you got to prove that you've got the ability, usually through work in some way. There's lots of different ways to do that, but I'd say that's by far the hardest.
Yeah. And listen, this is very anti-ladies get paid here, but I think if you're just getting started in something and you can't get anyone to hire you, you have got to volunteer. You have to either create or participate in somebody's side hustle. And if they're not going to be paying you, then you have to be getting testimonials from them, the ability to put it on your website. And then really, just because you weren't paid for something doesn't mean you can't or shouldn't be putting it on your resume. So create the experience for yourself and then really dig into that you learn quickly, that you can be self-taught, you are self-motivated. These are qualities, these are strengths that oftentimes cannot be taught from somebody else. You either have them or you don't. Quick question on connecting dots, telling a cohesive story. And then guys, we're going to get into the nitty gritty of like resume.
Wait, can I jump in on what you just said?
Sure. Go ahead.
This is a tricky one, but I have a lot of thoughts on it, but I also think it's somewhat like soaked in privilege, this idea of doing free work. Like, I think the language here is really important. Right? Because I think like monetary exchange is one form of exchange, but I think if it's abstracted a little bit and is thought of as exchange of value, right? Like I am getting value and then I'm getting experience I can put on my resume. That has value for me. It may not have direct cash implications. And so I think you got to get real crisp and clear on the value and not let yourself get taken advantage of.
Yes.
But I think that's where like people just like, oh, well, oh yeah, it's gonna be one. And now they're like 15 projects for free on their resume. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
But I think having clarity on the value you're getting out of the exchange doesn't have to be money. I've seen it gone the other way where it's like, I don't ever do that. It's like, yeah, but you haven't like earned the right to get paid. And so you want to get paid for something you've never done before. And sometimes doing work for free, even though I don't think it's free, if we think about it as value, could actually be quite helpful. Now you have to be in a place to be able to afford to do it.
Right.
Totally get all that. But I think it's an important distinction.
Yeah. And that's why I always like to start with, how do you manage this process? Because, for example, when I first moved to New York, I was a hostess at a restaurant while I also was producing a short film that ended up getting nominated for an Academy Award in the student category. Not that I'm in film, but totally leveraged all of that to move into fundraising, et cetera, and go on into marketing. I was getting paid by the restaurant to be a hostess there, but I was learning how to manage my time and my energy and knowing the place that each of these things had in my life. This was for money because I needed to pay my rent. This was for experience and connections, and knowing that it wasn't going to directly lead to a job tomorrow, but you have to call it at some point. Okay, now I'm ready to take the leap to apply or whatever it is. Quick question though about telling a cohesive story. So this moving a little bit on from pivot here, but just if you've got disparate roles that you've done in the past, how do you connect the dots when each of these experiences maybe don't seem like they relate to one another? And then this kind of bleeds into, if you want to talk speak to how that is expressed via the resume or the LinkedIn or the interview, but just in general, this is a question I get asked a lot. How do I stitch everything together if it looks like on its surface it doesn't quite make sense?
Well, one is it doesn't have to.
Okay.
You can omit things. But I also feel like there's like I think people are generally of high integrity and honesty. And so there's this thing that comes with describing your career history that people need it to be like exhaustive and show everything. And they feel like they're somewhat being disingenuous if they leave something off. But you can leave things off, if they're not helpful, and say like, look at everything that's on the piece of paper and like, is it helping? If it's not helping, you don't have to put it. You're not being a liar by omitting. Like if someone asked you, hey, what did you do during this time? Then you tell them, of course. But there's almost like an oversharing that I see with a lot of job seekers out of this sense of like, they feel like they're being dishonest. And it's like, no, you're not. It's totally fine. That's part of storytelling. That's part of like crafting, So one is I don't think you have to. Two, I also think things are more connected than we give them credit for. I ran a podcast for a little while called Career Paths. Didn't end up doing that well. but everyone would start the interview. The whole idea was like talk through people's careers, like in chronological order. And everyone would always start with like, well, there's no like rhyme or reason. And then they would end the episode as we like talked through it and they'd be like, oh yeah, I guess that is why it all sort of wove together. Because I had an interest in this and I had an interest in that. And then I wanted to try that. So I don't think you necessarily have to give your life story, but I do think you can weave it together. And then my third part is it ultimately kind of doesn't matter in that it should be a response to what the company's looking for.
Right.
The other thing I see is that people want to sort of tell their story in the authentic version of the story, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is in job search in particular is like being clear on what the company is looking for and just look through your career history and say, like, what did I do at any of these places that make it clear why you should hire me for that? Right. So I don't know if you're going to go work and be a marketing executive at Bobby Flay's, like restaurant chain, and yeah, say that you were a hostess because that's relevant. You have domain experience. You empathize with the customer. If you're going to go work at some other company, then leave it off.
Right.
I think a lot of people ask like, oh, how far back should I go? I always just tell people like, if it helps make your case for why they hire you, it should be on there. If it doesn't, it shouldn't.
I absolutely adore this advice because I have also seen way too many resumes that feel like they need to tell me every single thing chronologically. It's interesting that you see it more as like a desire to be honest, whereas I actually saw it as a desire for credit. Like I want credit for the work that I've done, but also fear of if I show a gap, does that say something negative about me? So I'm curious, with that chronological stuff, if there's, some empty slot, so to speak, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think what you said, I think all those things are true, right? I've seen things on like, I can't get my resume down to 4 pages because I'm not like doing my career history justice. It's like, just like, that's not justice. That's about like you feeling like you're lopping off parts of yourself, like work that you're proud of, that you want to be seen. But the part that people have to understand, like, it's not helping actually.
Right.
It's not like, I always go back to like the same analogies. If I'm going to a doctor and the doctor's like, oh, wait, I do ears, I do noses, I do throats. It's like, you do too many things. You can't possibly be good at any of them. It's too good to be true. And I think when people are evaluating for jobs, it's like, they don't want to see that you're a generalist. Like, be the generalist once you get the job, then show all the ways that you can add value. But when you're job searching, you want to be the square peg to their square hole, like as much of a bullseye as you could possibly be. So that makes it a lot easier to trim things away.
Yeah.
Because like, this is superfluous. It's not helping. It's not helping. It's not helping. Okay, this. Less is more. I really mean it. I think people want to see a concise, clear, punchy thing. Not that, because if we all showed what we were capable of, it would be crazy. Like, you wouldn't hire anyone.
Yeah. And that's why it's good to come to these networking type opportunities, because then we can actually get to know each other and build those relationships and then pass, them on to one another. What's so wonderful though in all of this is we're not taking a stab in the dark at figuring out what it is the employer wants. They are literally telling you in the job description. However, I think there is a dissection of the job description that probably needs to happen. So I'm curious if you have recommendations for, how do you kind of read between the lines, or I don't know, keywords, or how would you analyze a job description so that you can then tailor your materials to it properly?
Yeah. So, you'll hear things like, hey, if you're like at least X% qualified for the job, then you should apply or not apply. That's actually like far more subjective and unhelpful than I think people lead it to. Parts of job descriptions are not equally weighted. So I'd say first and foremost, go to the requirements section, right? JDs have a couple, like they all call them something stupid and rename them, but like they have like 5 core parts and in order of importance, like requirements, number 1. Number 2, responsibilities. Number 3, nice to haves or preferred qualifications. Then you've got like about the company, which might have some interesting context. Then there's like the little sales pitch for the position itself. And then there's like all the other stuff like benefits and all those things. So depending on the size of the company, if you don't meet 100% of the requirements, they can't bring you in. There's legal regulation. If as a company takes funding from the government, they have to be in compliance with what's called OFCCP, which means you have to meet 100% for like fair labor. You have to meet 100% of the requirements. Now that's not on the JD, but Amazon, anyone that does work with the government has to comply with that stuff. So I would generally say try to get 100% of the requirements. Some are a little more subjective. You must show 5 years experience in social media at a D2C brand. Mm-hmm. You might be able to sort of like weave that together, if you sort of, again, highlight certain projects, but like you need a degree in communications. If you don't have that, they're not going to hire you. Like plain and simple. That's like a yes, no answer, So some might be a little more interpretive than others, but you need to like a simple test. Give a friend the JD and give a friend your resume and be like, is this person qualified? Forget it's me. Is this another thing is people forget that what companies are basing the decision off of is the JD, not the person. Mm. And so they'll be like, oh yeah, I know that software. It's like, yeah, but it wasn't on the resume. And I'm not in the business of giving you the benefit of the doubt. So the resume gets called in, not the person. You have to decouple those two. Ideally, they're kind of like one and the same, but they're not, right? The resume is like a snapshot of you with certain information. So anyways, requirements section, I'd say, is number 1. Then number 2 is responsibilities. These are the requirements, are things you have to have done, right? Those are about your past. Responsibilities are things you're going to do.
Yeah.
So those are forward. But the more you can show I've done the things that you want me to do, the better. So what I tell people as a simple little test is go to every bullet in the job description and add a question mark at the end of it instead of a period. And just then ask yourself, like, did I do that? Did I do that? Did I do that? Right? Just like it's a simple little reframing. And then if you did, great. Write something that shows that you did that. Ideally, it's got metrics and some like catchy verbs, but none of that matters. Show that you did that. So that's responsibilities. And then nice to haves get a little trickier. So what happens with nice to haves is if someone else has those nice to haves, they're probably going to get called in. And so that doesn't mean that one's just kind of like going to be subject to the rest of the applicant pool. So if other people have the nice to haves, they're going to have it. If you don't, so the more of them you can have, the better. But I can tell you this, companies really want the nice to haves. That accelerates a lot of the onboarding. The hiring managers generally really want the nice to haves. The way that happens is they bring in their list of requirements. They go to the recruiter and the recruiter's like, that's crazy. That's like a unicorn. You're never going to get that person. Like, okay, so let's take like these 5 and put them in the nice to haves. But I really, really want those. If you find that person, please, let's get those people. So nice to haves are important also. And then domain and, context. It's like not necessarily in the JD. Companies might not say we're a D2C brand. You should kind of know that about them. So the more that you can make those connections about the company tied to your experience, I think those are pretty important as well. That last one is a little more research and a little more work on you, but the first 3 are pretty much always in the JD. Oh, I felt like a really long answer.
Excellent answer. And we have somebody Mary, who typed up a bunch of notes and put it into the chat. Love it. Mary, I hope you're using things like this as, talk about this in your job interviews, that you do this, because that was very helpful for everybody. I'm also really enjoying kind of the controversial conversation that's happening of, like wanting to not agree with we need to meet 100%. And I think it's because we as women keep hearing this statistic, and I don't remember it exactly, but it's like men will apply for jobs if they're 50 to 60% qualified, whereas women, we feel the pressure to be 100%, otherwise we're not applying. And so then what happens is we don't put ourselves out there as much, and we're basically rejecting ourselves before somebody else can. And then, and then for Laura, most of the jobs she's gotten hasn't been an exact match. I mean, especially if this is coming through relationships, it's going to be a whole other ballgame.
So let me answer that one though, because I do think that people are their hardest critics, right? So like, I know people that if you were to ask me, like, hey, can this person do X, Y, Z? I'd say like, for sure. And then if you ask them directly, they'd be like, no, I'm not good at that. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a difference between, right, there's still interpretation there. And I think a lot of the messaging and important dialogue around applying and qualification has less to do with what's on the JD and how hard women are on themselves in terms of actually being qualified. And it's proven time and time again that we're really bad at self-assessing. Just in general, humans are bad at self-assessment. And so, right, you might be comparing yourself to like, if someone asked me like, how good are you at weightlifting? Well, like, yeah, I weightlift and I put up decent weight, but like compared to like a Mr. Olympia, like I'm terrible, but like compared to someone who's never weightlifted, I'm actually not that bad. And so I think all those things are like really important what we're using. So I think more people are more qualified than they give themselves credit for. And I think women are worse at that than men. But I think if you are objectively unqualified, man or woman, if your resume, again, it's not even the person, right? Like if you look at these things, and I don't think everything in the requirements section is equal also. I think some of them have a little more subjectivity. I generally tell people like the further they go down the list, the less important they are to the company. Like I don't have any signs to back that up, but just having written a lot of JDs, it's kind of like I do the first one or two. I'm like, these are really important. And by the fifth one, I'm like, I just need one so it kind of looks substantial. I kind of need that one's just like, must be a good communicator. It's usually like the last one. It's like, okay, yeah, sure. No, yeah, check for everyone. So I get it. And I want to be sensitive to that. And it's true. Like from the people I've coached, I've just seen more women take themselves out of a process than I've seen men. It's purely qualitative. I don't like the man woman binary. I think a lot of it is like personality based, but I have seen it. I've seen it with my family. I've seen it with my wife. I've seen it with my daughters. I've seen it with a lot of people that I've coached. So there's like the being hard on yourself and the objective part, but then there's the actual like, I don't know, whatever the most objective version is of what's a requirement. And like I said, for different companies, startups can be super loose.
Right.
Big companies are going to be far more rigid. So there's a lot of nuance on these things. There's, like I said at the beginning, there's no absolutes in job search.
Yeah. And that's why I loved your suggestion of putting first a question mark after each one of the bullet points, having your resume, and then giving it to somebody else to look at, because we are all too close to ourselves. I really want to talk about quantifying accomplishments here. You wrote a fantastic, not just one, you have a post, actually, I think 2 posts that are pinned on your LinkedIn. So I'm going to be dropping David's LinkedIn into the chat here because he's a great person to follow. But quickly for getting, measuring impact. So this is something that I encourage everybody to put on both their resume and their LinkedIns, and also, of course, speak to it in your interview. For those who say, I don't have the kind of role that measures impact, or it was too long ago, or I don't even know where to begin. You have great suggestions. I would love for you to share some of them with everybody here today.
Real quick, because I see Robin's notes. My goal is not like, I would be very sad if I left here with you discouraged. So the requirements part, I think the requirements section, I'd say, is by far the most important. I don't think you have to meet 100% of every single bullet on a job description. And so the bigger the company, the more important it is that just the requirements section. I think responsibilities, that number goes ways down. The nice to haves, that number goes way down. So the bigger the company, the closer to 100% you should be for the requirements. The smaller the company, probably the more leeway you have, right? And I think that also applies very much if you're applying online. Like if you're networking, you might even still have a little bit more because they might hire on character and the reference and stuff like that. So that doesn't mean your job search is doomed. Like there's ways. There's just some things become a little tougher. Some things might require a different approach or a different strategy. I've seen people that were grossly unqualified land jobs. So that's not to say it can't be done. All right, quantifying. Most organizations run on metrics, right? So even if you run a nonprofit, they have to raise funds. They've got to get donors, right? So someone's measuring your efficacy somewhere in the business. At some level. And so the more you can tie it back to your impact on the business, the better. You may not know, but there's a lot of things that come with the metrics. Like one, you're a person who thinks via metrics, you can communicate. They're also just like, I don't know, think about any ad and any product you've ever bought. There was probably like a number in the ad. For some reason, we just buy them. We like believe statistics. One of my favorite quotes is the Mark Twain, I think, lies, damn lies, and statistics. right? We just kind of believe numbers. We don't question numbers in a way that we should, unfortunately, but it's just kind of the way it works. So those help. And so I think there's plenty of ways to try to use numbers, but if you can't, the number is not the absolute, right? Like, you really want to show impact. And so if you want to do it qualitatively, well, hold on, let me take a step back to that, like, honesty around resumes. I think people look like they get really hung up on the precision. Like, I don't know the exact number. It's like, well, I don't know if it was like 42.3% that it went up. It's fine. Just say between 40 and 50%. That's totally cool. No one's going to audit that. Right. So I think like a little bit of comfort with the storytelling around numbers is key. No one's going to go check you're not being a liar. Yeah, I think you can be directional. And if you're uncomfortable, you can use language to soften it. Around, up to, approximately, use ranges. You can do that, but the numbers will stand out. So that's I'd say like one tier down from like the actual number is like sort of approximations or sort of, softening language around the numbers themselves. And then you can still use qualitative. You can still say, improved in conversion, even if you don't have a number. Again, I think numbers are better. I think our eyes go straight there, but you can also communicate impact without the numbers. And you want it, if you're in operations and you're, I kind of think about jobs as like making money or saving money for companies. And so did you do that? If you're applying for an operations position that was more in like a cost center, like, were you helping the company be more efficient and save money? If you were in a revenue, were you helping the company make more money, right? Or if you're in product, did it make more money? So, it just shows that you did the work to like arrive at those metrics. Again, it's not an absolute. You don't have to have it. I've seen people land jobs with just like descriptions of what they did, but they probably had something else going for them, like a referral or knowing somebody. Those tend not to get hired online. So I think, I don't know if that was, no, it was part of another question around the skills, but anyways, that's where I'll stop on the metrics there for now.
Yeah. One thing I just want to note, I think a big reason that women, this is like a huge conversation to have and not to be had in the last 10 minutes, but I just want to note for all of us who might be feeling discouraged that we don't know our impact on the business bottom line, there is a thing called occupational segregation. This is actually a huge cause of the wage gap, where women tend to be in roles where it is a little bit more abstract. It is harder to define our impact on the financial ecosystem. For example, more men are in sales. That's obvious. You did X, you brought in Y. For women, we're more in like the HR, marketing. These things 1,000% impact the business bottom line, but you have to go digging for it. You have to be creative in finding the metric and telling the story of it. And you also have to get comfortable in the softening of the language, right? The approximations, when I think a lot of us feel like, oh, if it's not the exact number or perfect, we shouldn't talk about it. So I just wanted to note that for anybody who might be feeling discouraged or intimidated by going to collect the information about your business impact. It is hard, but it is doable, and you must do it. I'm curious if you have a recommendation for anyone who, like, where do you start? Like, you gave some good prompts for how to think about it, but even just that like beginning, how do I begin to like reflect on this job that I had and how it then impacted the business bottom line?
Yeah, think about like what the managed entity was, right? If you were in HR, it's people. Mm-hmm. So how many people did you bring on board? How much did the company grow in size? When I got there, helped create the employee onboarding process that helped us go from 600 employees to 800 employees over the course of 24 months. Right? Like, also, people might think, the other thing is, I see people not give themselves enough credit. Someone might hear that and be like, so what? That wasn't even that interesting. Yeah, that was just part of my job. That's what I did. It's like, no, that is interesting. Like, to grow, those teams. And it's also just far more interesting to read than, redesign the onboarding process for the company. Right? Like, was it for one? You also, like, in the absence of information, people are generally going to go to like the lowest common denominator. They're going to be like, oh, okay, well, you did it for like 5 people. It's like, no, I did it for 300 people. That's substantial. Mm-hmm. Especially a company who's looking to grow by 300 people in the next 24 months. It's like, perfect. That's the person I want. They literally have the experience of what we're about to do. So think about it. If you're in support or customer service, what was the number of tickets? If you were in operations, what was the number of processes? Think about like what was like the managed entity, what was like the artifact that you were constantly engaging with, and then try to back out how many of those you did over a period of time. And again, it doesn't have to be super specific, like at least the exact quantity.
Yeah. Fabulous. And if it's not clear how you made the impact, chances are you made impact on another team where it is clear how they, for example, if you impacted the sales department. So then work backwards from maybe them. Question about the difference between LinkedIn and your resume.
Let me answer one more thing on that one also, because I've seen as a blocker for people, it's like, oh, I was part of a team. I didn't do it myself. Like they want to share the credit, which is awesome and admirable. But you can use language for that. Was part of a team that was, you can do that. That's okay. Just because you didn't do it, it doesn't mean you're like stealing other people's credit. Plus, your resume is the time to brag.
Love it. Love it. Difference between resume and LinkedIn, the function of each. Are you essentially doing a copy and paste from your resume to your LinkedIn, or there's certain things that should be on or off one or the other?
So I think about marketing as inbound and outbound. And if it's so anyone's not, I'm not going to go into that now, but inbound things come to you, outbound, you put it out there. So your LinkedIn is a tool for inbound marketing, right? It's not really an outbound marketing tool. It is people come to you on LinkedIn. So you really want that to be curated to be a good sort of catcher of intent. So you want to stuff it with keywords. You want to have the above the fold be very good, so it's compelling and people scroll down. It's also more of a visual medium. And then there's many layers to it. Like you can do very little on LinkedIn and it can be good enough, or you can do a lot and it can be a very strategic asset. But at the very least, you want to make sure your LinkedIn profile is full and rich.
Okay.
And has keywords. So when recruiters search, they find you. Your resume is an outbound tool, and it's a much more precise tool than LinkedIn, right? Because your resume is not out there in the world. And so you usually use it when you apply, whether you networked, whether you emailed it, whether you applied online. It's your opportunity to do a very tailored and specific view of your career history. And so that's why I see as the big difference. Now, that being said, your LinkedIn can't be, I still need to be able to go to your LinkedIn and see what you stand for, like what you do and what your abilities are. Like the LinkedIns that I think are not successful are when I go and their headline says like seeking employments in project management, product management, or operations, and possibly sales. It's like, I don't know what you do like at a glance. Like you do too many things. And so I'm like, next. So that doesn't mean you can make your LinkedIn very general, but I think you can put more keywords in there. You can fill out your career history. You have a bunch of areas that are kind of hidden by default. So like your about section only shows 3 lines by default. But if you click show more, you can put a whole bunch of stuff in there that does get caught by LinkedIn Recruiter. Same with all your work experiences, same with all your skills. So there's an ability to add a lot of richness to your LinkedIn that you could never put onto your resume.
But it's such a balance, right? Because if you have so much space to have richness, but then you don't want to seem like a generalist. So to bring it to the keywords for a second, because you mentioned that a few times, and this goes to a question somebody submitted, just optimizing your LinkedIn. They said for SEO marketing, but I think we'll take it a next step further of just attracting the right recruiters. Okay. So how do you figure out what are the keywords to use?
Go look at job descriptions. Look at hard skills are generally more valuable. I mean, it changes by position and seniority, but say hard skills are kind of wanted. So if you're in marketing, depending on the type of marketing, but if you're in demand gen, you're in performance marketing, like TikTok ads, Facebook ads, Google ads, like be specific. I also think people think like, oh, I don't need to give that level of specificity. Like, saying paid media covers it all. No, it doesn't. Like you need to get to that level. If you bought Facebook ads, do Facebook ads. If you know how to use a Facebook ads manager or business manager, they call it, put that in there. Like people might want to know that you have that level of specificity and they look. If you're an engineer, it's like, oh, I know how to do functional programming. It's like, no, I want to know that you know Scala, or like get specific. Like specificity is your friend when it comes to your function. Now, you want to be mindful of like the broadness. So if I'm a marketer and I'm like, oh, well, I did some video editing on the side and I know Adobe Premiere. It's like, that's not necessarily helping you, right? So all these skills that cluster around showing your depth in a profession, but don't sell yourself short. Like, it's okay. You can be exhaustive. You know, social media marketing. I know TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, like anything, like really force yourself to just think like every skill I have, get those in there. And then look at JDs and see if they're popping up and showing up. And, and so, like marketing is my favorite example because it sounds specific, but it's actually quite broad. If you're an SEO marketer, if you're a performance marketer, now if you're an influencer marketer, social media marketer, even those two are pretty similar. We've been hiring for both. And like what we look for in an influencer marketer versus a social media marketer, they may have been a social media marketer early in their career, but their last job was in managing influencers, which is different than originating content. I want to see that they know how to negotiate contracts and, things like that. So just look at the job title. The other thing you can do is you can look at other people's LinkedIn that have that job title and see what they're including.
We like that. Yeah, I'm curious. I know that you've been doing a lot of hiring recently. Has that, or is it going to change how you do Teal? Or, have you learned things, and it's very meta now that you're like really in the process of going through what people submit. Are you learning anything new from it? Actually, you know what? Better question, because this is a question that everybody asks. Stand out. Who is standing out? How did they stand out?
I mean, this sounds kind of lame, but they're qualified.
Okay.
And the thing is, it's so funny because this is what makes job searching stink, is that there's a lot of people who don't respect that. Mm-hmm. And they really distort the signal to noise ratio. Like our JDs say we can only hire in the US, only. Like we do not have the infrastructure, yet 30 to 40% of the applicants are international.
Wow.
But we still read them.
Okay.
We still read them. And then we say, I'm hiring for a growth product manager. That's like the one I'm currently hiring for. And I'm like, if you haven't done growth, if you haven't done experimentation, you're not. I had someone who was like a beauty line sales rep apply the other day, like in the US, but like objectively not qualified, like zero things on their background that would show they're qualified for this position. And so people do that. And so I think that's also, I feel like what's getting lost in the comments here is like, if you're the people that are really sort of gumming up the works, I promise you have zero qualifications, but they still make up like altogether between the international stuff, the folks who are like shooting their shot, that's like 70%. Mm-hmm. But it takes up a lot of energy to review those and read those. Mm-hmm. So I would say 30% are people that we'd actually look at. Okay. And then within that, yeah, there's folks that are just like really on the nose, and then there's folks that really considered, but you only have so much time. And then there was another set of applicants that were, so like for this job, we had plenty of product managers apply, but they hadn't done growth. They hadn't done experimentation. And I was like, okay, this person's probably a great candidate, just not exactly what I'm looking for in this job. But they're in that 30%. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Which actually I'm realizing should make everybody here feel a little bit better, because when you all tell me, I see that this job has thousands of applicants on it, et cetera, well, seems like only about 30% of those thousands of applicants are even relevant. And chances are you are relevant. You just might not be telling your story in the correct way also. Quick, almost last question here. Just that open to work banner, because there's been some controversy about it. And I know you just wrote a LinkedIn post. Everyone here knows that open to work banner, right? It's that green mark. This is obviously assuming that for somebody who is okay with being honest that they're looking for work, so you're not currently employed elsewhere. Does it make you look, quote, desperate? That's the controversy. What's your hot take on it before we wrap up today? Oh,
Thank you. I muted myself. I have a very loud mechanical keyboard. So are there people that think it makes you look desperate? Yes. Those people exist. There are vain people out there that those people exist. Do I think they're the majority? No. Do I think it does more help than harm? Yes. I think it's a good functionality. Now, caveat, if you are employed, do not put on the green banner. I feel like some of these things are like somewhat obvious, but just in case. Yeah, the open to work setting actually has two modalities. Like you can turn it on so that recruiters can see it in LinkedIn Recruiter, but it does not turn on the green sash. And then there's the version that has the green sash and that setting, of course. I think if you are unemployed or employed and your employer knows you're leaving or something, if it's okay for the world to know, then I think it's valuable. I think your network can see it and help you. I think what seems a little backwards, like I'm of the belief that confidence is incredibly attractive. Desperation is kind of the inverse. But the green sign does not mean that. Right. So I think there are job seekers who go out there and try to use sort of sympathy as a reason to be employed. I'm not going to make my rent. Like that really sucks. I will gladly donate you money, but that's not why I'm going to employ you.
Right. Right.
So, and I think people get that kind of mixed up. And I think it's unfortunately the wrong conversation. And I think job search is sort of riddled with this stuff. The 1-page resume, 10-point font. It's like all those things, what's being lost is like the intention behind those things. And so, right, like be concise and be clear. That's what the 1 page means. If it's 2 pages or 3 pages, who cares? If it's concise and clear and like full of value, they're going to read it. Right. Then I see people then take that to the extreme. They do like an 8-point font that you need a magnifying glass for. And it's like, okay, check, you win the 1-page contest, but you're not hired because I can't read this, And so I think that the more important part is like show up, add value, and demonstrate what it's like to work with you, right? There's plenty of people with the green banner that are posting really insightful, great tips every day. Like if I had a job for this person, I would hire them on the spot. I just don't have one. And then there's people without the green banner that are like negative and nasty. I was like, I don't care what your profile had. I would never hire you. Yeah. And so I think more important is like, how are you sort of leaving the network better than how you found it? And if you show up that way every day, the banner's just not going to really matter. Like people want to hire the best people.
Right. I know there's lots more questions about LinkedIn specifically, but I think we'll do a session, not to say that David's not a LinkedIn expert, but he's a job search expert and he has many things to talk about. So don't worry, we'll do a future job seeker specific to LinkedIn. So please all come back for that. So I'm actually going to just drop in the chat real quick. Our newsletter, if you're not already subscribed, ladiesgetpaid.com/subscribe. That's where you'll get event introduction or event invitations. David, any final words? I mean, you gave us great wisdom here, but, call to action, next steps. Of course, in our follow-up email with the recording, we'll include links to everything, but, the floor is yours to close out today. Thank you so very much for being here. Your time is very precious and we appreciate you.
I care deeply about your mission. I have 2 daughters and I hope that they don't have to fight a lot of the things you guys are fighting. So however I can be helpful, they're 4 and 9, so they have a little bit of time, but still you never know.
Just a little time.
a little. I care deeply about your mission and what you're doing with Ladies Get Paid. So however I can be helpful to anyone, feel free to DM me on LinkedIn. I'm /David Fano. And we're putting out a bunch of free tools and resources. So whatever we can do to help you, let us know.
I am putting stuff in the chat here. We have an affiliate link for Teal because, ladies get paid. There you go. So click on the link that I am putting in the chat and also in the follow-up email. I'm also going to drop my own LinkedIn in there because I've gotten more active. And the last thing I'm going to mention as a call to action for you all is to sign up for our waitlist for our newly totally revamped salary negotiation video course that is about to be relaunched. It is so much blood, sweat, and tears have gone into this. So please just stay updated by clicking on that link that I just put in there, ladiesgetpaid.com/salary-negotiation-course-waitlist. Thank you for all the wonderful comments in the chat. I love our community very much. David, you're the absolute best. Stay well, everyone. And now go get paid.
Thanks for the invite, Claire. Thanks, everyone.